Hi everyone, my name is Eike Schneiders from the University of Nottingham, and on behalf of myself and my co-authors from MIT and Cornell University, I have the pleasure to present our paper titled Understanding Entrainment in Human Groups, Optimizing Human-Robot Collaboration from Lessons Learned During Human-Human Collaboration. And this project was supported by the TASSHub, funded through the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, as well as the Office of Naval Research. If you want to understand entrainment and how it occurs between collaborators, we first need to define the concept. Entrainment is a core process described as a synchronization between different agents, and Renaud and Traktinsky define it as a process of reaching the same rhythm and is a required part of synchronizing with someone else. What makes this process so interesting is that it happens seamlessly all around us already. Examples include metronomes on a freely moving bass, as illustrated here, fireflies synchronizing their flashing to each other, or humans walking while subconsciously synchronizing their steps. All of these are examples of entrainment. But why should we care? Previous research has shown an abundance of positive side effects of moving in sync. Hove and Risen, for instance, have shown that as little movement as tapping in the same rhythm increases the feeling of togetherness and the likeability between collaborators. Another study by Wildermuth and Heath has demonstrated that moving in sync increases the willingness to collaborate and contribute to the collective good of a group. A small body of prior literature exists that has shown that this entrainment can happen between humans and robots in dyadic settings as well. And examples include Lawrence et al., who demonstrated that even in a simple forth and back reaching movement can lead to entrainment with robots. Entrainment to full body movement has been demonstrated with the social robot Now, which was demonstrated by Ansar Min et al. Given this potential of positive side effects when moving in synchronization, we believe that informing future research and design within human-robot collaboration might benefit from a human-centric approach to understanding which factors contribute to the occurrence of entrainment. In this study, we take a human-centered approach towards informing the improvement of future human-robot collaboration. We do so by investigating how humans synchronize while completing fast-paced, repetitive tasks inspired by industrial pick and placing. To this end, we piloted a series of tasks and narrowed the selection down to one final task resembling pick and placing. We investigated these tasks using 10 dyads and 10 triads, resulting in a total number of 50 participants. Each trial lasted 4 minutes. Each collaboration had one bowler, which was the participant handling the ball, and 1 to 2 cubers, which were participants handling the cubes. For the dyads, we only used position A and C, while the triads also used position B for the bowler as shown in the diagram. We used 2 cameras for audio-video recording, motion tracking of participants' hand and key objectives of the interaction, as well as semi-structured group-based interviews following the task. The best way to get an understanding of the task is through a small video clip of the dyadic collaboration and the triadic collaboration respectively. So let's have a look.
You should push it so it's like closer, like yeah. Yeah, if you want to.
So following the task completion of all groups, the first thing we did was to investigate if we had any differences between configurations in terms of demographic distribution and task performance. This was inspired by Roy and Aidan. The reason this was important was that some of the findings were of comparative nature between dyads and triads, which means that we needed to know if the groups and the random allocation of participants had an impact on their performance. However, no significant differences were found between dyads and triads in relation to gender distribution or handedness. Furthermore, no differences were found between performance, which was measured using average iterations per 10-second interval. Dyads performed an average 4.43 iterations, while triads completed 4.36 iterations per 10 seconds interval. This indicates that dyads and triads are comparable. With this in mind, we used the motion tracking data to identify the completion of each individual task iteration. This allowed us to identify the time each iteration took, and as mentioned, we were interested in consistency of these iterations, which is indicative of the occurrence of entrainment and not the actual task speed. What we see in these two graphs is the raw data plotted in green for each dyad and triad, and the average in red. A consistent amplitude is indicative of a higher consistency between subsequent iterations of the task. This means that lower fluctuations are an indication of the emergence of a temporal rhythm resulting in the occurrence of entrainment. For both configurations, it seems that after an initial period of high fluctuations, a norm in iteration duration emerges with very low fluctuations between individual iterations. This tendency was for some groups noticeably, as for instance described by Triad 5. I think once we got in the rhythm, we were able to kind of just keep going. Next, we conducted a video inspection in order to identify possible differences between how groups negotiate who is leading and who is following. Here we identified two distinct patterns. The first one, which we call static, is characterized by the early onset of one leader that remains unchanged throughout the course of the interaction. The static strategy was particularly prominent in the dyadic groups, with 7 out of 10 dyads selecting one leader without changing this throughout the course of the 4 minutes. The cuber in the dyadic configuration was typically setting the pace, with slight waiting times at the point of assembly before the bowler was ready. This was for instance expressed by the cuber in dyad 15, who stated that, "I like to believe that I set the speed. I don't recall waiting for the bowl very often." In the triadic configuration, a singular leader was rarely noticeable. A leader here was often absent. However, at times we saw multiple leaders emerge, as in the case of, for instance, Triad 1, in which the bowler expressed that, "I feel I kind of am the follower for their collective behaviors, because I was trying to match the tempo, but also in this case, because I personally see the dropping of the cube as a cue, an audio cue on what the rhythm is." Next, we looked at the point of assembly. We defined the point of assembly, or POA, as the point in space in which the 2 or 3 actions meet, i.e. the cubes are dropped in the bowl. We can clearly see, as illustrated in the figure, that the actions meet in a seemingly consistent position, even over the course of many iterations as visible here. The first frame shows iteration 24. 60 iterations and 2.5 minutes later, the POE is seemingly the same. Through the interviews, we identified 2 strategies leading to the decision of the POA. The first one aimed at optimizing the collaborative performance, while the second one was aiming to ease one's own task. Examples verbalized by the bowler include Triad 4, in which the bowler stated to simply place the bowl in the middle between the 2 cubers. They were putting the cubes down at the same time, so I just need to place it in the middle to make it easy for them. A more extreme example is presented by the bowler in Triad 2. Here the bowler moved the ball further away from their own endpoint, resulting in more work for them. However, they still perceived this as beneficial, as it increased overall team performance. They stated that, "I also optimized the location of the ball, and then we can move it further away from the bin, because on a global sense, that would be the best strategy considering both of your arms, i.e. the cubers." The second strategy, which emphasized a conscious choice of making the task easier for oneself, was for instance described by the bowler in dyad 11. "The cuber should be the one who decides the speed, and I can adjust to it. Later I found out I'm actually the slower one, so then I just moved the bowl nearer to me so that it's easier for me to put the cubes in." Next, we used the motion tracking data in order to see if not just the point of assembly remained consistent, but to see if the trajectories going there changed in consistency. What we see in this figure are 10 frames, each representing 24 seconds of hand trajectories between the 3 collaborators of Triads 3. In each frame, we can see around 10 iterations and the trajectories each collaborator took to meet at the point of assembly. As visible from the first 3 frames in the top row, all 3 collaborators have strong fluctuations of trajectory. Furthermore, they are still all experimenting with the use of both hands for the task, visible by the movement of all 6 lines. This shifted over the next few frames until we in frame 7 see a very clear tendency to follow the same path for each iteration using the same hand. This is visible by the fact that the spread of each line is decreasing and that only 3 colors, i.e. 1 per collaborator, seem to be moving. So it seems that not just the position and timing synchronize, but also the individual trajectory of the collaborator. The last finding I briefly want to present is related to the importance of task-intrinsic multimodal feedback, specifically the dropping of the cubes from the cuba into the bowl and consequently from the bowl into the bin was perceived as high-value feedback to make it easier to coordinate the collaborative effort without having to visually focus on the task at all times. This was mentioned by both the dyads as well as the triads. Dyad 20, for instance, mentioned that when she dropped the cube into the bowl, that's when I knew it's ready to dump it into the bin. In a similar fashion, this benefited the triads, where triads 5 expressed that I think whether I knew it or not, I was cueing into that sound of dum-dum, i.e. the sound of cubes dropping in the bin. Interestingly, at times the bowler did not hit the collection bin with the cubes, which meant that the cubes landed on the carpeted floor, resulting in the absence of this distinctive acoustic feedback. And this in turn could lead to confusion or distraction as the iteration wasn't processed as completed. With this study, we have shown that entrainment seems to occur in human groups in the context of industrially inspired pick and placing tasks. Based on these observations, we propose 3 design implications for robot designers and researchers. Firstly, we argue that designers should consider how collaborative robots can adapt their behavior based on human collaborators' fluctuations in performance, speed, and point of assembly deviations. This would allow the human to define the speed and position of collaboration instead of having to follow the fixed movement of the robot. Secondly, given the value of task-intrinsic acoustic signals observed, we should consider how collaborative robots can utilize sensory channels to provide feedback emphasizing key events during the collaboration. This would allow the human collaborators to synchronize to an additional signal, making the collaboration easier. Lastly, designers should consider how collaborative robots can exhibit short-term consistency, allowing them to be consistent between individual iterations, while also allowing for long-term adjustment based on the human's collaborator's behavior. With short-term consistency, we refer to the legible consistent behavior between individual iterations of a given task, while still allowing for some flexibility in the long term. More details on everything presented here can of course be found in the paper, and with that I say thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.